The ship came down slow. That was the first thing people noticed. Every other vessel that had ever docked at Meridian Station came in fast, corrected, burned retro. The compact ship descended like it had all the time in the universe and knew it. Long and pale, shaped like something between a knife and a prayer, it settled into the docking cradle without a single tremor. Up in the observation gallery, 300 people held their breath. Down in the docking bay, Colonel Danny Reeve scratched the back of his neck and yawned. He was a lean man, sun-darkened, with the kind of quiet that made junior officers nervous. Not because he was mean. Because he was patient in the way that made you wonder what he was waiting for. He stood with his hands loose at his sides, boots flat on the deck, and watched the ship's ramp lower with the same expression he used for weather reports and budget meetings. The Thursday Vani came out first. Velkareth was tall, taller than any human in the bay, and his skin moved with soft light the way water moves over stones. Blues and greens, mostly. A little gold when he stepped into the full light of the dock lamps. His translator unit sat at his throat, a small silver disc. When he spoke, the sound that came out of his mouth was a chord, low and harmonic, and the disc turned it into words. People of Earth, Velkareth said. We come to you in need. The Galactic Compact has fought the Vreth Dominion for 11 years. We have held. We have bled. We have done everything that honorable warfare demands of a civilized species. He paused. The gold in his skin brightened just slightly. The Vreth have broken one of our border worlds. We are asking for your help. The chamber was full of council members, generals, diplomats, and aides. All of them were watching Velkareth. All of them were taking notes. Danny was watching the other Thursdayvanis standing behind Velkareth. 4 of them. Positioned exactly right. Not guarding, Velkareth wasn't worried about this room, but placed like punctuation. Like a species that had done this 47 times and knew where to stand. He counted that, filed it somewhere useful, and went back to listening. Velkareth spoke for 20 minutes. He covered the nature of the Vreth threat, the geography of the contested zone, the rules of engagement the Compact had observed and expected all Allied forces to observe. He used the words measured and proportional 6 times between them. He explained the protected zones, the acceptable targets, the formal ceasefire protocols that both sides honored every 90 days for what translated, roughly, as a breath period. A breath period. Danny wrote those 2 words on the small notepad he carried. He underlined them. When Velkareth finished, the room opened for questions. Council members asked about supply chains, legal status, command authority, compensation. Velkareth answered each one with the ease of a man who had prepared for the room. His translator disc never hesitated. Then Danny raised his hand. Velkareth looked at him. The gold in his skin went still. Colonel. You want soldiers, Danny said. Or you want results. The room went quiet in that particular way rooms go quiet when someone has said the thing everyone was thinking and nobody planned to say out loud. Velkareth looked at him for a long moment. We want the war to end. All right, Danny said. He put the notepad away. That's a different ask. He sat back down. Council members exchanged glances. Velkareth's expression, as far as any human in the room could read it, gave nothing away. The paperwork came that evening. 12 names on a single sheet. The files attached to those names were heavily redacted, long blocks of black ink over what had clearly been very detailed incident reports. One file had a full page blacked out except for a single sentence near the bottom that read, all personnel accounted for, origin of secondary explosion still under investigation. Velkareth's aide, a younger Thursdayvani named OSSVeth, was tasked with reviewing the files. He read them twice and then went to find Velkareth. The human records, he said. Several of the incidents described, the translator is producing results but I am uncertain the results are accurate. The word it keeps generating for their behavior in the field is, he stopped. The closest equivalent in our language is the word we use for a river that decides it no longer prefers its banks. Velkareth was quiet for a moment. That is not necessarily a bad quality in a soldier. No, OSSVeth agreed. But it is not what we asked for. Perhaps, Velkareth said, and looked out the narrow window at the blue curve of Earth below them. Call it accurate enough. The 12 were gathered at Fort Hale in Nevada, brought in over 3 days from wherever they'd last been stationed. They were not a matched set. They were different ages, different builds, different branches. What they shared was harder to see than rank or unit, something in the way they looked at new rooms before they relaxed into them. Something in the way none of them were surprised to be called. Corporal Lou Ferris arrived last, on a transport from Anchorage, still in field clothes, with a bag that clinked slightly when she set it down. She was 22 and looked younger except around the eyes, where she looked considerably older. She found the bunk assigned to her, sat on it, looked at the briefing packet she'd been handed, and read the cover page once. Then she said, to no one in particular, "Oh, that's fine. That's totally fine." She started sharpening a boot knife she didn't need to sharpen because it was already sharp enough to cause several types of legal trouble. She sharpened it anyway. It was something to do with her hands while she thought. Dr. Priya Nolan was not military. She was the one addition to the 12, a 13th, called separately, briefed separately. She arrived at Meridian Station the day before departure and was shown to a small cabin that smelled like recycled air and something faintly metallic. She had a bag of books, a tablet loaded with 6 years of xenobiological field data, and the specific kind of tiredness that belongs to people who have been asked to explain complicated things to people who are not going to like the answer. A compact liaison officer showed her to a seat in the briefing annex and handed her a data file on Vreth combat behavior. She read it without expression. Then she read it again more slowly. Then she looked up. "This is what you've been using to make your battle plans," she said. The liaison officer said yes. She looked back at the file. "Can I see the data you didn't include?" There was a long pause. "How did you?" "Because what's here explains why you're losing," she said. "It doesn't explain why you thought you were winning." The ship left the following morning. 13 humans. The station fell away behind them, and then Earth fell away behind it, blue and white and very quiet at this distance, and Velkareth stood in the observation bay and watched it go. OSS Veth came to stand beside him. "How are you feeling about this?" he asked. Velkareth watched the planet until it was just a point of light among all the other points. "I am trying," he said carefully, "to figure out which question I should have asked before I started." OSS Veth had no answer for that. Neither did the stars. The compact warship was called the Sevethvar, which translated, roughly, as measured crossing. It was enormous in the way that things built by species who had been building things for a long time are enormous, not just big but confident, every surface doing exactly what it was designed to do and nothing else. The humans were given a tour on the second day. Velkareth led it personally. He walked them through the command deck, the tactical floor, the crew quarters arranged in harmonic clusters based on shift rotation and what translated as emotional resonance compatibility. He explained each section with patience and detail. He was very thorough. He had done this before with diplomatic guests and scientific observers, and he knew how to pitch the explanation just right. The humans asked good questions. Operational questions, practical questions. What's the load capacity on the secondary drives? How long does a jump transit take? What does the crew eat? That last one was from Lou, who was not asking because she was hungry. She was asking because she wanted to know what they considered important enough to ship across the galaxy. She catalogued the answer the same way she catalogued everything: fast, quiet, filed away. The compact crew watched the humans the way people watch something they've been told is safe but haven't quite decided to believe yet. They had been briefed. They knew these were soldiers. What they had not been prepared for was the specific way soldiers moved when they weren't on duty, the loose economy of it, all that capability sitting completely still, like something with its engine off. The crew kept finding reasons to walk past the humans' assigned quarters. Just to check. On the third day, Velkareth sat Danny down in the tactical briefing room and walked him through the Vreth. The Vreth Dominion had been fighting wars for longer than Earth had writing. They were methodical, formation-based, precise. Their command structure ran deep and clean. Every unit knew its role. Every move was coordinated from the top. They advanced like a tide, not fast, but continuous, and they did not pull back. "They are very good at what they do," Velkareth said. He pulled up a holographic display of a recent engagement. Compact forces moving in careful waves. Vreth formations holding, pushing, advancing in the exact pattern the tactical models had predicted. Danny watched it for a while. "So are termites," he said. Velkareth's translator disk worked for a moment. Then it offered him 4 possible meanings for that sentence. He considered each one. None of them were particularly reassuring. He decided they were all probably correct and moved on. The thing about Lou was she got bored the way most people get hungry, regularly, physically, impossible to ignore. On the fourth day she found herself in a maintenance corridor 3 sections past where she was supposed to be, not because she was snooping but because she'd followed a sound she couldn't identify, and the ship was genuinely interesting when you got into its bones. The sound turned out to be a power coupling that was slightly out of phase with the conduit it was feeding. A very small problem. The kind of small problem that gets ignored because it doesn't cause immediate failure, only gradual inefficiency. Lou spent about 20 minutes fixing it with tools she'd borrowed from her kit without asking. The compact engineer who found her there was named Ketvas, and he stood in the corridor doorway for a full 10 seconds processing what he was seeing before he said anything. What he said was, in translation, "How did you know that was there?" "Heard it," Lou said. She handed him back his corridor panel. "You got another one of those about 60 meters that way. Different pitch. Same problem." Ketvas checked his maintenance logs. He had not scheduled that coupling for inspection for another 3 rotations. He looked at Lou. She was already walking toward the next problem. He followed her. By the end of the day they had fixed 7 things he hadn't known needed fixing. He told Velkareth about it that evening, in the specific tone of voice a person uses when they need someone else to help them understand what just happened. Velkareth said, she was bored. Ketvas thought about that. She fixed 7 systems because she was bored. Yes. What does she do when she is engaged? Velkareth did not answer that question. Meanwhile, Dr. Nolan had been in the ship's data archive for 30 hours straight. She had requested the full Vreth combat footage archive on the first day and been given it, 30 hours of engagement recordings spanning 11 years of war. She watched all of it. Then she requested the secondary archive, the footage the Compact's tactical division had flagged as non-standard engagement, and filed separately because it didn't fit the models. There was a delay on that request. Not a refusal. A delay. When OSS Veth brought it to her and asked how she had known it existed, she explained, very patiently, that the patterns in the primary footage had a gap in them. Like a sentence with a word missing. You couldn't see the missing word, but you could feel the shape of it if you knew what sentences were supposed to feel like. She watched the secondary footage for 8 more hours. Then she wrote 12 pages of notes, folded them, and went to find Danny. She found him in the observation bay, sitting in the dark, doing nothing. Not reading, not sleeping. Just sitting. She had learned in 4 days that he did this sometimes, and that interrupting it was fine. He simply relocated the nothing somewhere else and kept doing it. She sat down next to him and handed him the 12 pages. He read them. He read slowly, but he read everything, which she had also learned. When he finished he looked at her. You're saying they signal retreat before they signal retreat. They signal anxiety, she said. It shows up in their formation spacing. They tighten before they know they're going to retreat, about 4 minutes before the order comes down. The tactical AI the Compact is using isn't looking for it. But you are. I'm looking for everything, she said. That's what I do. Danny was quiet for a while. Outside, the stars slid past. Tell me what they're afraid of, he said. She thought about it. Disorder, she said finally. Things that don't fit the pattern. They're very good at the war they planned. They're bad at the war that doesn't look like the one they planned. Danny looked back out at the stars. Well, ain't that something, he said. He said it soft and slow, the way he said everything, but she had learned by now that when he said that phrase something in his head had locked onto a thing and was not going to let it go. The unit ran a combat drill on day 5. The Compact tactical officers asked to observe. Velkareth said yes, thinking it would help the crew feel more confident about their auxiliary forces. The drill lasted 40 minutes. At the end of it, the senior tactical officer, a Thursday Vana veteran named OSS Kell who had been in 11 years of war, wrote his report in the ship's log. He used the word unconventional 7 times. He used alarming twice. Then he stopped and looked at what he'd written and added one more line at the bottom. It read, recommend we do not engage in competitive scenarios with the human unit. He did not explain what he meant by competitive. He felt it was self-evident. That night, Velkareth found Danny alone in the observation bay again. He sat down across from him without asking, which was, for a Thursday Vane, a significant thing. Personal space was formal among his species. Choosing to breach it was a statement. Danny didn't say anything. Neither did Velkareth for a while. My species has not lost a war in 400 years, Velkareth said eventually. He was not boasting. He said it the way someone says a fact they have not fully decided how to feel about. Danny nodded once. That's either real good or real bad luck, he said. Haven't decided which. The gold in Velkareth's skin moved slowly, like sunlight through shallow water. He thought about that for a long time. The ship dropped out of transit 3 hours later. The Vishari contested zone opened up on the forward screens, gray rock, thin atmosphere, the long dark of contested space. And there, at the edge of it, the Vreth fleet. Enormous. Precise. Moving in the exact formation that every compact model had predicted they would use. Danny looked at it for about 4 seconds. All right, he said. He turned to the room. Here's what we're not going to do. The compact's plan was clean. 3 waves. Time to the Vreth shift rotation. First wave draws fire, second wave flanks left, third wave hits the supply corridor while the defense is reorienting. It had been modeled 1100 times. The tactical AI gave it a reasonable probability of success. Projected casualties on the compact side sat at 34%. That was considered acceptable. That was the word they used in the briefing room. Acceptable. Danny sat at the head of the table and listened to the whole plan without interrupting. Then he sat there for a moment after the compact officers finished. All right, he said. We're not doing that. The room went still. Senior Tactical Officer OSS Kell, who had fought for 11 years and earned every decoration the compact gave out and several it had invented specifically for him, looked at Danny the way a man looks at weather he didn't predict. Colonel. This plan has been modeled extensively. The probability calculations. Give them what they expect, Danny said, and they'll do what they planned. Every time. He pulled up the holographic display himself, a thing no one had seen an auxiliary officer do, and started marking the terrain with his finger. They're sitting on Vishari 4 because they know the approach corridors. They've got every entry point covered. Every standard entry point. He marked something else. Not an entry point. A long, curving depression in the moon's terrain that the mapping data listed as geologically unstable, not suitable for troop movement. What about that, he said. OSS Kell stared at it. That is not suitable for troop movement. Says who? The room spent 40 minutes arguing. Danny spent those 40 minutes eating a ration bar he'd pulled from his jacket, slowly, reading the geological survey data on a personal tablet. When the arguing stopped, not because anyone had agreed but because they had run out of new ways to say the same things, he looked up. Priya, he said. Tell them what you told me. Dr. Nolan stood up. She had been sitting quietly in the corner, which was something she was very good at. The Vreth formation on Vishari 4 will tighten in the left flank approximately 4 minutes before they issue a retreat order, she said. That tightening is visible in their drone positioning. It's a stress response. They don't know they're doing it. She looked around the room. If something hits the right flank hard enough, and fast enough, and from somewhere they don't have a model for, the left flank will tighten. 4 minutes later, the retreat order comes. The formation breaks. Silence. What needs to hit the right flank, OSS Kell said slowly, is something that does not appear on their tactical models. Yes, Danny said. He finished the ration bar. That's what we're for. Lou led the ground insertion at 0200 station time. Her team of 6 did not go through the main approach corridor. They did not go through either flank. They went through the geologically unstable terrain depression that the mapping data had flagged as unsuitable, moving in single file, slow and low, every step tested before weight went onto it. Lou went first. She always went first. It took 2 hours. It should have been impossible. The compact tactical AI, which had been quietly monitoring through the team's suit sensors, generated a classification for their route 3 separate times and deleted it 3 separate times because the classification it kept producing was one that had never been applied to a live combat insertion. The category it finally settled on was Path of Last Resort. Lou, had she known, would have found this funny. She would have laughed about it later. Right now she was moving. They came up through the base of a thermal vent system on the south side of the Vreth position, well inside the perimeter. 6 humans, moving quiet, in a place that the Vreth defensive model had not included because the Vreth defensive model had been built by people who did not consider that entry point a real entry point. The Vreth, to their credit, responded fast when they realized what was happening. But fast was not the same as ready, and ready was the only thing that would have helped them. From the ship, Dr. Nolan watched the drone feeds and the formation data simultaneously. The right flank was engaged. She counted seconds. She watched the spacing in the left flank's drone positioning. Watched the gaps close by fractional degrees as the units pulled inward without being ordered to. 3 minutes and 40 seconds after engagement began, the left flank tightened. "Danny," she said into the comm, 4 minutes. "Already moving," he said. The compact forces, positioned and waiting on Danny's order rather than the original 3-wave timeline, hit the left flank at the 4-minute mark, exactly as it broke. The Vreth position on Vashari 4 had been designed to hold for a minimum of 3 weeks against a compact assault. It held for 4 hours and 11 minutes. Compact casualties, 3 wounded. None critical. In the compact's 11 years of this war, no engagement of this scale had produced casualties that low. OSS Kell sat in the tactical room afterward and looked at the numbers for a long time. He looked at them the way you look at a sum that keeps coming out to the wrong answer except you've checked it 3 times and it's right. He flagged the report for Velkareth with a single line of notation that said, "I do not fully understand what I observed today. I recommend we do not ask them to stop." The Vreth commander on the ground sent a formal communication to the compact after the engagement ended. It took the translators 40 minutes to render it fully because parts of it were written in a formal register of Vreth language that hadn't been used since before the war, the kind of register reserved for communications that had no existing category. What it said, stripped to its bones, was, what were those? Not who. What. Velkareth read it 3 times. He called OSS Veth in and had him read it. They stood together and neither of them said anything for a while. "They've fought the compact for 11 years, OSS Veth said. They've never asked that question before." "No," Velkareth said. "They've never needed to." He wrote back to the Vreth commander with the standard compact acknowledgement of the engagement. He did not answer the question. He was not sure he had an answer that would translate. In a communications room deep in the Vreth fleet, a priority signal was encoded and broadcast on all fleet channels. The compact intercepted it inside an hour. It was brought to Dr. Nolan because by now everyone had quietly accepted that she was faster at translation than the ship's official system. She sat with it for 20 minutes. Then she walked to the tactical room, where Danny was drinking something hot and looking at nothing in particular, and she put the translation on the table in front of him. It said, "These are not compact forces." It said, "Escalate classification." It did not say what the new classification was. Danny read it. He read it again. He picked up his cup and drank. "They need time to invent a category," Dr. Nolan said. "I know." He set the cup down. "How long do you think that takes?" She thought about it. "For a species that hasn't needed a new category in 200 years. She pulled up the next engagement data on the table screen. 3 more Vreth positions in the contested zone. Each one larger than Vashari 4. "Not long enough," she said. Danny looked at the map. "Well, ain't that something," he said. He was already thinking the war changed shape. Not the way wars usually change, not with a big moment, a turning point, a single engagement everyone would remember. It changed the way water changes stone, slowly, without drama, one engagement at a time. Vashari 4 was the first. Then the relay station at Kethmoru. Then the contested corridor at the edge of the Vashari system, which the Vreth had held for 6 years and lost in 9 hours. Each time, the Vreth response got bigger. Faster. And less precise. That last part was the important one. A formation-based military under pressure does one of 2 things. It holds its shape and absorbs the pressure, or it loses its shape and becomes something else. The Vreth were too good to fold immediately. But they were also built around a system that required the enemy to behave in predictable ways, and the humans were not doing that. Every time the Vreth recalibrated, Danny changed something. Not everything. Just one thing. Enough. The recalibration would take time, and he used the time, and by the time their new model was ready he had already done the next thing the model didn't account for. Dr. Nolan tracked it from the ship's data room, which had become hers by quiet consensus. Nobody had told her she could have it, but nobody came in anymore without asking first. She mapped the pattern in the breath responses the way a doctor maps a disease, not just what it was doing now but where it was going, what came next, what the body did when it ran out of obvious responses. She brought her findings to Danny at the end of every engagement. He read them. He asked 3 or 4 questions. He made his next decision. The compact officers had stopped arguing with the decisions about 3 engagements in. Not because they agreed. Because the outcomes kept being right, and it is very hard to argue with outcomes. Velkareth formally recommended to the Compact Council that the Human Auxiliary Detachment be given permanent Allied status. He sent the recommendation on a tight beam transmission, encrypted, flagged priority. Then he sat in his cabin and wrote an addendum. The addendum said, in plain terms, he did not believe the humans would accept this offer. He believed they would go home when the job was done. He believed this was the correct thing to do and that the Compact should let them. He further recommended that the Compact spend some time, after the war, thinking about what it said about them that they had waited 11 years before making this call. He sent the addendum. Then he sat for a while, looking at nothing, his skin doing the slow gold-shifting thing it did when he was thinking through something he hadn't finished thinking. The 3 compact worlds at the edge of the Vishari system were called, in Thursdayvane, the Heartline. Not because they were the most important worlds, but because losing them would put the Vreth in a position to cut the Compact in 2. The Vreth had been moving toward them for 8 months. Patient, methodical, inevitable. The Compact Council gave Danny operational command of the Heartline defense. There was a long silence in the room when they told him. A silence from the Compact officers who had been in this war longer than most of those humans had been alive, watching command authority pass to someone from a species that had been in the galaxy for about 6 minutes by their count. Danny said, "I need 6 hours. And I need Priya in the room." He did not say thank you. He did not say he was honored. He pulled out a chair and sat down at the main planning table, and Dr. Nolan sat down next to him, and they started working. What they built over those 6 hours was not a battle plan. It was a trap. Not a physical trap, not an ambush or a supply line cut. A trap made of behavior. Dr. Nolan had spent weeks mapping how the Vreth processed new information, and she had found the seam in it. They could adapt. They were very good at adapting. But their adaptation process required them to first identify the shape of what they were adapting to, and that identification step took time, and it required the situation to hold still long enough for the model to form. The plan made sure the situation never held still. 7 simultaneous actions across the Heartline approaches, each one designed to look like something different. Each one designed to demand a different recalibration. All 7 hitting inside a 40-minute window, so the Vreth command structure had to process all of them at once. OSS Kell looked at the plan for a long time when they presented it. "This is not a military strategy," he said. "Not as an objection. More like a man naming a thing he doesn't have a better word for." "No," Danny said. "It's a question with too many answers at once." Lou's team was in the field for 18 hours. The longest stretch yet. She came back from the 3rd objective with a burn on her left forearm she hadn't mentioned over the comm, and when the medic on the ship looked at it and said something sharp and concerned, she said, "Oh, that's fine, that's totally fine," and did not look at the medic's face while she said it. The medic cleaned the burn and wrapped it and asked if she wanted something for the pain. She said no. She sat on the edge of the treatment table and looked at the wall for a minute. Just the wall. Nothing interesting about it. Smooth and gray and completely ordinary. She looked at it with a great deal of attention. The Vreth fleet broke off from the Heartline approaches at hour 19. It was the first time in the war a Vreth fleet of that size had broken off without a formal concession, without a ceasefire request, without any of the protocols that 11 years of structured war had built up around retreat. They just stopped. And then, an hour later, a communication came through on a channel the Vreth had never used before, a direct line, not addressed to the Compact Command, not addressed to Velkareth, not going through any of the formal diplomatic infrastructure the war had developed. It was addressed to the Human Auxiliary Detachment. Velkareth brought it to Danny personally. He handed over the communication tablet without a word. Danny read it. He was sitting at the planning table, coffee going cold at his elbow, the tactical maps still up on the screens around them. He read the message once. He set the tablet down. He looked at it for another moment. Then he looked up. "Lou," he said. Lou was across the room, sitting on an equipment case with her boots off, rotating her right ankle the way she did when she'd pushed it too hard. "Yeah," she said. He didn't say anything else. just looked at her. She reached down and picked up one boot and started putting it on. "Oh, that's fine," she said. "That's totally fine." He nodded. He looked across the room to where Dr. Nolan was still at the data screens, still working, still going, the way she had been going for 30-something hours. "Priya," he said. She didn't look up. "I know," she said. "I'm already reading it." The Vreth communication said, "We would like to discuss terms." In 11 years of war, the Vreth had never said those words to anyone. Velkareth read the message over Danny's shoulder a second time and then stood up straight and looked at nothing for a while. The gold in his skin went completely still. "For 100 years, OSS Veth said quietly from behind him. He had been in the room. Velkareth had forgotten. "We have been fighting wars for 400 years and the Vreth have never asked for terms first." "No," Velkareth said. "They have not." "How?" OSS Veth said. Not accusation. Something closer to genuine confusion. The voice of someone who has studied warfare his entire life and encountered something his studies did not cover. Velkareth looked at the humans across the room. Danny, putting his jacket back on. Lou, tying her boot. Dr. Nolan, still reading, a pen in her hand, making notes on paper because she said screens made her eyes go flat. They did not fight a war, Velkareth said slowly. They solved a problem. The war was just the shape the problem was wearing. He thought about that for a moment longer. "We asked for soldiers," he said. "That is not what we got." OSS Veth waited. "Is that bad?" Velkareth watched Danny cross the room and say something quiet to Dr. Nolan, who looked up from her screens for the first time in hours, and nodded. "Ask me again," Velkareth said, "when the Heartline still has 3 worlds on it." The negotiation room on the Sevethvar was not designed for this. It was a briefing space, clean lines, long table, chairs built for Thursdayvana proportions. They brought in 2 different chair sizes for the humans, and someone had placed a small water dispenser on the table that didn't quite fit and kept getting moved from one end to the other as people arranged themselves, which was, in its own small way, a perfect summary of how the meeting had been going. The Vreth diplomatic contingent was 4 people. They were gray-skinned, broad through the chest, and they moved with the precision of a species that had spent centuries treating every room like a room they might need to defend. They sat down. They folded their hands. They waited. Dr. Nolan sat across from them. This had not been anyone's plan. The original arrangement was to have Velkareth lead, with Danny present as the human representative. But when the Vreth contingent had entered the room and seen who was waiting, their formation spacing had shifted by the kind of small degree that only Priya Nolan would notice or care about. She noticed. She cared. She leaned over to Danny and said something quiet. He looked at her for a moment. Then he moved 2 seats to her left. She straightened her notes and said, in Vreth, "Thank you for coming." The room went still. Not the polite stillness of diplomacy. The deep stillness of something unexpected landing in a space that had not prepared for it. The Vreth contingent looked at her with the flat focus of people recalculating something. Their lead diplomat, whose formal title translated roughly as Voice of the Dominion, was named Vrasktal. He was old by Vreth standards, which meant he had fought in every phase of this war from the beginning. He looked at Dr. Nolan for a long, careful moment. Then he answered her, in Vreth, and his voice had something in it that no compact translator had ever caught in 11 years of intercepted communications. She answered him back. He answered her. Back and forth, slow and even, while everyone else in the room sat in the particular discomfort of watching a conversation they could not follow. Velkareth's translator disk was working, producing renderings in his ear, but the disk was designed for formal Vreth, the register used in official military communications. What Dr. Nolan and Vrasktal were speaking was older. Deeper. The disk kept flagging words as, no established equivalent. After 20 minutes, Danny leaned toward Velkareth and said quietly, "What are they talking about?" "Weather," Velkareth said. Then, at Danny's look, literally. "A specific storm system on the 3rd continent of the Vreth home world." "I do not know why." Danny sat back. He had learned, over the past weeks, to trust when Dr. Nolan took a road he couldn't see the end of. He picked up his water cup and waited. The formal negotiation started an hour in. Terms. Territory. The contested zone. The Heartline. What the Vreth would withdraw from and when and at what pace. What the Compact would agree not to pursue. What the 11 years of dead would cost, in the formal accounting that both sides needed in order for the ending to be real. Dr. Nolan translated everything in both directions. She did not simplify. She did not soften. She delivered each position exactly as it was given and let the weight of it sit in the room, and when there was silence she did not fill it. At hour 30, Vrastal stopped the formal session. He said something directly to Dr. Nolan, not to the room, not in the diplomatic register. She listened. Her expression didn't change, but her pen stopped moving on the paper. She turned to Danny. He wants to know what we want, she said. In return. For our involvement. The room waited. Danny set down his cup. He was quiet for a long moment. Long enough that a junior compact aide on the far side of the table shifted in discomfort. Long enough that Lou, sitting 2 seats down, looked at the ceiling and then at her hands. A straight answer, Danny said. Dr. Nolan translated. Vrastal waited. Why did you start the war? Danny said. It was not an accusation. The way he said it had no heat in it at all. Just the same flat patience he brought to everything. He looked at Vrastal across the table the way he'd looked at the Vreth fleet position the first day, 4 seconds, and then a decision. The silence that followed was very long. Velkareth was watching Vrastal's hands. They had been folded since the beginning. They were still folded. But something in the fold had changed, the pressure of it, the way the knuckles sat. He had spent 11 years reading Vreth communications and this was the first time in all of it that he saw something that looked, on a Vreth face, like being caught. Vrastal spoke for a long time. Dr. Nolan listened without interrupting. When he stopped, she was quiet for a moment. Then she turned to the room and translated, her voice even, her eyes on the table. It was a resource conflict that had begun as a miscommunication 60 years before the first shot. A boundary claim that both sides had considered obvious and neither side had clarified because clarifying would have meant admitting they didn't already know. Then the claim became position. Position became pride. Pride became 11 years and everything that 11 years cost. The room was very quiet after she finished. Velkareth sat with it. He was thinking about the report he'd sent, the addendum, the one that asked what it said about the compact that they'd waited 11 years. He was thinking about the 47 first contacts his species had conducted, all the careful procedure, all the measured crossing, and how it had not occurred to them in 60 years to simply ask the question Danny Reeve had asked in 30 seconds. The terms were settled by hour 72. They were fair. More than fair, in some ways, considering who had won. The Vreth would have understood a harsher set of terms. They had given harsher terms themselves. Vrastal looked at the final document for a long time. Then he said something to Dr. Nolan, in the older register, the one the disk couldn't track. She nodded. She did not translate it for the room. Later, when the Vreth contingent had gone and the room was just the humans and Velkareth and OSS Veth, Danny asked her what he'd said. She thought about how to answer for a moment. He said, she told him, that in 11 years, no one ever asked. Danny looked at her. That's it. That's it. He picked up his jacket from the back of his chair and put it on. The unit shipped home 5 days later. No ceremony. They had never officially been there. Earth's involvement was buried in a classified appendix that 3 members of the Compact Council had access to and would continue to have access to for the next 40 years, when the file would be reviewed, and then quietly reclassified for another 40. Lou slept for most of the transit home. Not the restless, half-awake sleep she'd done on the way out. Deep sleep. The kind that means something is over. Danny read. He always read. He worked his way through 2 books on the way home, both of them old, both of them about people who had done difficult things and then had to figure out what to do with themselves afterward. He did not think about the war. He thought about South Carolina in the fall, which he had not seen in 8 months, and the specific way the light sat on a particular stretch of road outside Fort Hale on a clear morning, and whether the coffee at the base canteen had gotten any better since he left. It had not. But he drank it anyway. Dr. Nolan wrote for most of the trip home. Not notes, something longer. The first 70 pages of what would eventually be a landmark paper on Vreth cognitive architecture, conflict initiation patterns, and behavioral communication across species. She would spend 3 years deciding whether she was allowed to publish it. She would spend a 4th year deciding how much to change to make it publishable. She would spend a 5th year deciding to publish all of it. The paper would change how the compact understood the Vreth. It would also quietly change how 3 other species understood the compact. It would be cited, in 40 years of scholarship, more times than she would ever count. She did not know any of that on the ship. She just wrote. Velkareth wrote his report in his cabin on the return transit, the formal record of the Human Auxiliary Detachment for the Compact Council Archive. He wrote it 4 times. Each version got shorter. He cut things that were accurate but that he couldn't prove, things that were true but that sounded like something else when he put them in formal language. The final version was 2 paragraphs. The second paragraph read, in translation, "We asked for soldiers. We were given something for which I do not have adequate classification. I recommend the compact remember the distinction. I further recommend we do not forget what asking cost us, nor what answering cost them." He submitted it. He sat back. He looked at the wall of his cabin for a while, his skin going very slowly through its colors the way it did at the end of long days. He had been carrying a feeling since he watched Earth shrink in the observation window. Carrying it through the first engagement and the heartline and the negotiation room and 72 hours of Vrastal's hands folded across a table. He had never been able to name it. He named it now. Not admiration. Not gratitude. Something quieter than both. The feeling of standing next to something you do not fully understand and knowing, with complete certainty, that it was standing exactly where it was supposed to be. He did not write it down. He turned out the light in his cabin and sat in the dark and let Earth get closer 1 kilometer at a time. Outside, the stars held still. They had not been asked for anything and had nothing to prove. That, he thought, was the one thing they had in common with the humans.